before we bring in James Olley, we'll be able to hear from James Olley because he spent his morning buzzing around London, previewing Chelsea against Arsenal, and he's been at both press conferences, and there's been a bit of love from the two managers. Pochettino and Arteta have been waxing lyrical about each other. Let's listen in.
Obviously, it was my first professional opportunity in Paris, and we just arrived at the same time. We lived together in a hotel for 3 months. He was critical. He's been one of the most influential persons in my football career, first of all, as a player. Without him, he took me under the arm like this, and he looked after me like a little child, a little brother, and it was big part of the success I had in Paris. It was because of him, because he really looked after me, gave me a lot of confidence, a lot of advice, and he's been a role model for me since that day. Not only when I was a player, but as a manager as well, because we have to make the decision to leave playing and start my coaching career. He had a big say on that, and I will be always grateful to what he's done for me.
Amazing memories, I think, is when you connect with a person like him, and we share the values and we share the passion of football. And yes, I can tell you, he's part of my family. From the day one that he arrived to Paris, we arrived together. We spent time together with our families also. First of all, in a few months in the hotel, and then we live very close. And it was an amazing history. And of course, for me, it's not surprised me what he's doing, because he was coach already when I was 17, when I knew him. Already was a coach, and trust me, he was really good in the judgment, in the how to see football, and it's not surprised me. He's great, still really young, and of course improving day by day. He can be one of the greatest managers in the world.
You said you spoke to him when you finished playing. I just wondered what his advice to you was.
Don't go into coaching, it's too hard. That's the first thing. Is it clear? Yes. Okay, now what are the options are? Yeah, I could tell, but I knew he was going to be a coach, and I follow him very closely, obviously, because as a player, he was already a leader. The way he understood the game, it was phenomenal, and I used to have him in my back, and he was constantly coaching me, and yeah, very proud of what he's done, and the way, especially the way he's done it through his coaching career.
And James Olley, and that's probably as relaxed as I've seen Arteta and Pochettino. Nice little question, but it's probably the only time he's not listened to Pochettino's advice.
Yeah, it's not quite Wenger and Mourinho, is it? I'm used to doing these press conferences back in those days when those two were it didn't really take much to wind the other up about them. But no, this was the opposite end of the spectrum, and it's quite rare actually for Arteta to talk and eulogise about a manager aside from Pep Guardiola to quite the extent that he did today. So it's going to be a very different feeling on the touchline at Stamford Bridge. I don't think we're going to see one of those, another one of those shoves, Wenger shoving Mourinho on the touchline as we saw a few years ago. But yeah, their relationship goes back a long way. And also, of course, it's worth remembering that it was only a solitary season they had together at PSG, because Arteta was on loan there at the time. So it's not as if this was something that was forged over a long period during their playing days. But I do think another interesting aspect of this is that when Arteta retired in 2016, our understanding was that he was offered a job by Mauricio Pochettino, who of course was then at Tottenham. And one of those sliding doors moments, really, that Arteta could have made a different decision, could be on the coaching staff at Tottenham under Pochettino, and could have ended up managing Spurs and being in a very different part of North London to where he is now. But of course, Arteta chose instead to go to Manchester City and had 3 great years there and ended up being in charge at Arsenal. So, yeah, it's one of those where history could have been very different had he taken a different decision at the time.
Janusz, 11th against 2nd in the Saturday evening kickoff in England. There's 9 points separating the two clubs. How big is the gap between the two clubs as a whole right now?
Well, not as big as that. Obviously, a different time in terms of what Mikel Arteta has had a chance to do, right? I mean, remember, all of us were, sacking him just a couple of years ago when they finished 8th, I think 2 seasons in a row. So obviously that progress that they often like to talk about and we dismiss should be taken seriously, but the difference is not as big. And I think we all knew it. It's just that Chelsea had such a low bar in terms of how they finished the season, the revolution that took place in the offseason, number of players and how young they were, the number of injuries that they've had, that we almost forgot about Chelsea and we chose to dismiss them to a degree. I think most of us knew that eventually it's going to click. The question was how quickly. I'm not going to sit here and say that it has already, but I wouldn't be shocked if to some degree Mikel Arteta is not afraid of this game more so than he was against Manchester City, because there it was always about Manchester City. If they were to lose, yes, I think he'd have to answer to that. But we've seen that movie before, where here Chelsea are starting to show I don't want camaraderie is maybe not the word, but it's something that came to my mind because it's a steady lineup with Raheem Sterling in the best form he's been in a long, long time. Cole Palmer coming in and doing well. Enzo Fernandez finally playing a little bit higher, and I think he's playing great. I watched him playing for Argentina as well, and it's just a matter of time. I think the price tag on him makes some people believe that, I don't know, he should be scoring 2 or 3 goals a game for us to say that he's played well. I think he's an excellent player and is going to continue to be fairly steady back four. So I just think that, this Chelsea team is capable of, I don't even know if I want to say causing a surprise, because it's Chelsea Football Club. And that eventually they're going to come good. To what degree, that's another question that you may ask later. But in terms of, would I be surprised if Chelsea beat Arsenal here? Not at all.
Okay, Brighton, Fulham and Burnley, the last 3 games. Successive wins, James, for Chelsea. Look, this is more difficult. I get that. It's Arsenal. But have Chelsea turned the corner?
I don't think we can say they've turned the corner. They've got a very difficult run of games coming up. It's not just Arsenal. They've got City. I think they've got Newcastle away. They've got Brighton again. They've got some big matches in the next few weeks, and it's probably only in the early part of December then we could start to say if they've had a positive run through those games that maybe they are turning the corner. Look, I think what is starting to happen, the word I'd probably use is chemistry. I think we are starting to see a little bit of chemistry between this team, and that was always going to take time, right? I mean, the sheer volume of turnover at the club in the last year since the Bowley Clear Lake takeover, well, it's unprecedented really in the Premier League to have this scale of turnover of players. Obviously, there have been multiple head coaches in that time. Now they've got another one in Pochettino, and he's only coming in the summer. It was quite an extensive tour of the US. I think if he'd had his way, he'd rather have disappeared up the Australian Alps for 2 weeks with no cameras and been able to work with his players there. But it was very high profile, traveling a lot around the States. And I think maybe what we're starting to see is the benefit of Chelsea not being in Europe, that he's having these clear weeks to be able to work with these players. And we're starting to develop those, see the development of those understandings on the pitch. And I would, as Janusz just said, I would single out Enzo Fernandez there. I think in amongst the sort of mess that Chelsea kind of was at the start of the season when they played Liverpool, I thought he was very good that day. And I think what's happened since is because Caicedo's come in, he obviously got himself up and running. It's freed Fernandez to play a little bit more in an advanced position. He was kind of playing as the holding midfielder last season. It's not really a position that suits him. I don't think it's his best role. But we're just starting to see a bit of alchemy between Fernandez, Caicedo and Conor Gallagher. And those two, in particular, Fernandez and Gallagher, are really giving Chelsea some energy and some dynamism in the middle of the pitch. And Caicedo's that good, I think, that he gives the other two a bit of security to be able to go and build attacks. And I thought we saw that particularly in the Fulham game quite a lot, that that Fulham, for example, would go and press Caicedo and Fernandez would be free, but he could come and drop deep, pick the ball up, and then try and build with those three through midfield. And that is a bit of a surprise, really, because the sort of word around in the summer was that Chelsea would accept 50 million for Conor Gallagher. West Ham made a couple of bids, didn't get to that valuation. I think the club were quite willing to let him go. They've obviously already also signed Romeo Lavia, and it'd be interesting to see when he's up to speed whether Lavia is the one that comes in and Gallagher drops out. Maybe that's the evolution going forward. But I think if we're talking about turning a corner, I think the only element of that maybe feels a bit ahead of schedule is that midfield, because, as I say, I think Conor Gallagher has surprised a few people with just how effective he's been alongside the other two, who of course cost big money, and you sort of almost expect them to come good eventually.
Janusz, I'm just going back to August 2018. The reason for that, that's the last time that Arsenal didn't win at Stamford Bridge, or certainly didn't lose at Stamford Bridge. Chelsea won that by 3-2. There's been a draw in there, but recent times, this fixture at Stamford Bridge favours Arsenal. What's your thoughts about this weekend on the Saturday tea time game in the UK? And you making Arsenal strong favourites, mild favourites, or not favourites at all?
I mean, look, stats are what you make of them, right? We were just talking about Arsenal and Manchester City, right? It was all Manchester City, and look what happened. So I don't know if I look into that. I think Arsenal would be favorites. I think, the momentum gain against Manchester City, I mean, it's hard to monetize that. It could give the boost to Arsenal. They understand, today's Chelsea, but, I think there's an expectation that they have to win. They understand it. I mean, I'd be saying the same thing if it was Sheffield United. It doesn't really matter. They're going to have to win everything. I mean, Manchester City, and the reason I think that is because I still believe that you're going to see Manchester City to go on those runs that we're so used to. And when you look at, Manchester City and who's beaten them and how, small margin for error, isn't it? In those Liverpool days where, they've lost, 2-3 games a season, or there's a 1 point in between. I think this is going to be another season like that. If Arsenal were to win the title, they're going to pretty much run the table. That's how crazy this is. But Arsenal are favorites. What I like about them is a win like Manchester City obviously goes a long way. But I also always ask, what's going to happen if this player's out or that player's out? And by now, look, I mean, Bukayo Saka's been out. Gabriel Jesus been in and out since, last season. Martinelli's been in and out. And that doesn't seem to cause friction or problems for Arsenal, even though at times I still think that maybe the depth of the squad is not that great. And perhaps it's much better than we all think. Certainly I do, and I'm buying into it. So, I'm not going to go throughout the whole team. But I think Arteta is learning. I also think going back to kind of the back four that got them there last season, some of it because of injuries, but some of it is tactical for sure. Not inverting a fullback in against Manchester City, kind of playing straight back four as they've done. There's a lot to like about Arsenal, but they know that this job is far from done.
Final question about this game to you, James. What threats did Chelsea pose Arsenal? And how did Chelsea stop the Arsenal threats?
Well, I think it's really interesting that Pep Guardiola, after the game where they lost at Arsenal, he talked about how good Arsenal were in midfield. And he put Bernardo Silva and Rico Lewis in the centre of the park to try and overload in that position because he wanted to stop Arsenal playing. He felt that particularly with Martin Odegaard. Well, with Saka out, Odegaard was the one that really had a lot of the responsibility to build through midfield. And I think what they tried to do was flood that area so that Odegaard couldn't get on the ball enough. And to be fair, it worked for large periods. And I think Martinelli coming on at half-time really changed the game for Arsenal in terms of being able to get out, have a different avenue of attack. Look, I mean, we don't know if Saka's going to play. Speaking to people around the club, they seem to be quite confident that he's going to be involved, at least from the bench. I wouldn't be surprised if he started the game. And look, Janusz is right. I mean, I think it was huge for Arsenal to win a game the magnitude of Manchester City at home without Bukayo Saka, because they've been so reliant on him. He played, I think, 87 consecutive Premier League games before missing that game against City. And, quite often when they've been a bit flat, it has been, for all the tactical innovation we talk about Arteta, sometimes it has been, let's just give it to Bukayo and hope he kind of creates something. And more often than not, he does, So I think it's huge for them to be able to have him back, but also know that they don't necessarily have to rush him back if he's not 100% ready, because they can win in a different way. And I think what Arsenal have done is maybe sacrifice a little bit of their creativity to try and be a bit more resilient. The numbers show they don't concede as many shots on target as last season. The creativity, as I say, has dropped a little bit in tandem with that. But I think they're going to be sort of a bit harder to break down, try and be a bit more compact. And that's going to be an issue for Chelsea. But of course, Chelsea, I mean, we talk about earlier turning the corner. I'm a bit loath. I'm always a bit loath to use XG as sort of the absolute gospel truth, but it has been an anomaly that Chelsea have underperformed their expected goals for quite a long time. They did it under Graham Potter. 7.46 in my mind. You know, they should have scored 8 more goals than they did, which is a big differential in that context. They also were underperforming their XG quite a lot under Pochettino when they weren't winning games. So they have been creating chances. The big question is, can they do that against a team that has been much more defensively disciplined this season?
It's one of several. Sorry, Janusz.
Just to quickly add to that, because it's going to be interesting, because, you know, I think the question originally was, you know, what's going to how does Chelsea cope with that? Because, you know, in that last game, I really think that Arteta outcoached his master, you know, by a country mile, because I didn't understand Pep Guardiola that he committed in the center of the midfield so much. Now I get it because Rodri was there, but I mean, he faced Arsenal without 2 of their key players. And he didn't take advantage of that, right? Because you think to yourself, well, no Saka and no Martinelli until he came in. You would have thought that that's where the concentration is going to be, and that's where Manchester City are going to go after them. And they didn't. They didn't take advantage of that at all, right? So here, I think Pochettino doesn't have to worry about that, because James just said it. That midfield looks very, very strong. Not just Enzo, but Caicedo is starting to come good. Made a lot of mistakes early on, but I mean, he's looking good, and Gallagher as well. But I think if you look at it, that now, assuming that Saka and Martinelli both start, which is a possibility, I think that's going to be an issue, right? I mean, this is what Pochettino has to think about, that, because at the end of the day, it's those 2 players in the wide areas that decide the game for Arsenal. Yeah. I think everybody believes in that, right? So Colwell on one side, well, you know, left back, he's not, I don't think. You think you have an advantage there, maybe not. And I don't even know who's going to play on the right-hand side. There's some talk about Reece James.
Gusto's back from suspension. Reece James has picked up another injury. They've been playing Cucurella on the left-hand side with Colwell as a left centre-back alongside Thiago Silva. So there are 1 or 2 options for Chelsea. But again, as James has said, we don't know. Yeah, we don't know if Saka is going to start. We don't know other team news. Martinelli, we'll find out, though. It's one of many good games this weekend in the Premier League.